Hello, I'm here with Sarah Midanik. Sarah is the president and CEO of the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund. Yes, that is the late Gord Downie of the Tragically Hip. Inspired by Chanie Wenjack's residential school story and Gord's call to build a better Canada, the Downie Wenjack Fund aims to build cultural understanding and create a path toward reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Sarah is also a member of the Metis Nation of Alberta. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to speak to her today about this idea of reconciliation. So what does it mean exactly? What does it look like in practice? And how does it relate to mental health and creating resilient communities, our topic of today? So now I can go on about her all day, but who knows better about what she does than herself? So hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this virtual, are we calling it a virtual forum?
Yes, it's an officially an all virtual forum now.
So I only regret that we don't have everyone here present today. It's always funny, you know, it's kind of like speaking into this space without being able to connect, but I guess we do the best that we can during these strange times.
I know, we're all making do. And I mean, if it's any silver lining, I'm kind of becoming a little more used to it. So I do feel like we're connecting as well as we can with people these days. So this will just have to do for now. But we're so honored to have you, and thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. I did my best to give a concise intro, but before we get too deep, I wanted to give you the opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on the Downie Wenjack Fund, what you guys do, and what it's all about.
Sure. So the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund really started organically back in 2016 with Gord Downie's learning of Chanie Wenjack's residential school story. His brother Mike shared it with him, and he couldn't believe that he had never learned about that in school or, you know, just in general. As, you know, a fairly aware and dedicated Canadian, it was shocking and disturbing to him that he didn't understand the history of the residential school system in Canada. So that inspired Gord to write 10 poems, which became the album, The Secret Path, which became the graphic novel in partnership with Jeff Lemire, who created the beautiful illustrations, which became the graphic film, which you can view through our website or on YouTube, through thesecretpath.ca or on CBC. It's out there to share and to use in your homes and your classrooms. And that really tells Chanie Wenjack's story. Chanie was a little Anishinaabe boy who tried to flee his residential school and make it home. And unfortunately, he didn't realize that following the train tracks home was actually 600 kilometers, and he didn't make it. But really, Chanie's story is one experience of many experiences of the 150 children who attended residential school. And I think the beauty and the power of Chanie's story is really inviting all Canadians to develop a deeper understanding of the true history and legacy of residential schools in Canada and the impact that this has had on this country.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy that you mentioned those, where people can find those, because I actually watched that video in preparation for this, and I had known about the story too, but I found that it was a very moving way into the whole topic. And I know that myself, I mean, I kind of found, I think about these ideas a lot, but I think it makes sense when I did find out about residential schools. But I do remember finding that out about them now, what I would consider, you know, to be a bit late. And I felt the same way. I felt like, how could this be something that went on? How could this be something that I didn't know about? And to be honest, and it's something that I was debating whether to get into with you also, because we're talking about reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And as a non-Indigenous person, you wonder, what can you do? And when you're younger, especially, you feel like you don't have a lot of power. So it was something I was a little bit in denial about because I didn't know what I could do. So hopefully that's something you can kind of, shed light on and help some of the non-Indigenous people listening to understand how they can be part of the solution when it seems so daunting.
100%. And that's exactly how the Downie Wenjack Fund was created. So through sharing Chanie's story, through this secret path, there was all this momentum that was created, and along with the release of the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was kind of a momentum that was building across the country, a greater awareness about Indigenous issues and the Indigenous history in this country. But there wasn't a lot of places to sort of gather that momentum. Mm-hmm. And, for non-Indigenous Canadians, just learning about this for the first time, saying, I never knew, but I want to learn more, and what do I do next? And that's really how the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund came to be. And so our programming at the Downie Wenjack Fund is based off of those concepts. So our Legacy Schools program is a free national program for educators. To sign up, you just go to our website at downiewenjack.ca and sign up. And we'll send you a toolkit that has copies of The Secret Path and a whole suite of resources that we've now digitized to help educators to be able to teach about the history and legacy of residential schools in the classroom. It's tough, there was a whole bunch of momentum back in 2016, and a lot of, school districts and governments mandated curriculum reform. And as governments change and budgets change and priorities change, there's still limited support and resources for educators to be able to feel comfortable about teaching this tough part of Canadian history. So we've offered sort of a turnkey educational support resource to help educators on that journey. We ask everyone to, participate in Secret Path Week, which encourages everyone within our networks to guide on the principles of awareness, education, and action. So once you are aware of what residential schools were, then you further educate to figure out what that has meant for our country and for Indigenous people in this country. And then the action is, what are the reconciliations that we can take to both learn from the hard lessons from the past and to create a brighter, stronger future together. And so we kind of hashtag that action of reconciliations, and it can be as simple as learning more about the land that you're on today, learning about the Indigenous communities that are where you reside in the country. And there's a whole bunch to learn about Indigenous people in this country. And Indigenous being used kind of as the umbrella term for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, all having very distinct cultural identities and practices. And so there's so much beautiful history and culture and language and resiliency to be shared and to be learned. And so I would encourage everyone listening today to engage and to start on that learning journey. Hopefully Downie Wenjack can be a helpful place to start on that. But there's lots of resources out there, and the first step is really just being open and willing to learn more.
Definitely. And hopefully we can find out a bit more about those reconciliations as we go along. Because I know, as you mentioned, as you can see, you guys are doing such great work. So I also encourage anyone to check out so what is the website officially, just so people can
Downie Wenjack, DOWNIEWENJACK.ca. But exactly. I feel like we could probably add that link in here with some.
Yeah, we're going to figure that out in the editing. We're new to this, but that's the plan. Just have everything.
In the comments, we can share it in the comments of the chat.
Exactly. Yeah, so please, everyone, check that out. Support, doing great work, and we want that to continue because we really appreciate that. So yeah, if you don't mind, we can get into some questions now. You mentioned reconciliation, a term that's become something of a buzzword of sorts in recent years. And I know you touched on it, but would you mind giving a definition for those who still may need clarity?
For sure. And, I don't think it's my place to necessarily be able to define what reconciliation means. Reconciliation has a very different meaning to every individual and every organization. I would say that reconciliation is a journey and a willingness to engage in dialogue and action that creates a stronger, healthier relationship between all inhabitants of this country we now refer to as Canada.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned dialogue and action, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's a combination of both, because I'm really trying to make it clear for people watching, like what is, and they should do as much as they can, but what is like the least someone can do to like be part of the act of reconciliation?
I mean, I would say even just engaging in activities like listening to this recording today, reading a book by Indigenous authors, listening to Indigenous musicians. When you're looking at news headlines and, there's such a sensationalized sort of feed within the news stream around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, violence against Indigenous women, land claims. What does that mean? Where do those issues stem from? Developing a deeper understanding of some of the systemic systems within this country, starting with the residential school system and obviously colonization, that have continued to contribute to where we are today.
Absolutely. And again, I just wanted to encourage, I want people to do as much as possible, but like we were talking about before, it can just seem like such a big topic. So I just wanted to make sure, and you mentioned such good examples there. Like, for example, reading a book or even an article by an Indigenous author is a good way in. And then, you can kind of find your way through to making a bigger difference. So the Downie Wenjack Fund focuses on building awareness on the effects, both past and present, of colonization and residential schools, among other things. For non-Indigenous Canadians, can you give some suggestions on how they can incorporate principles of reconciliation into their daily lives?
For sure. So one of our programs here at the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund is Legacy Spaces. And that's partnering with universities, corporations, communities. The city of Halifax has a legacy space, and it's literally earmarking physical space to hold conversations around what diversity, inclusion, what reconciliation means internally and externally for that organization and the employees of that organization, because it will mean something different to me as an Indigenous person as it might to a new Canadian or to a non-Indigenous Canadian that's been here, family has been here 200 years. So there's a lot that needs to be done to develop space to hold conversations that you feel comfortable to lean into subjects that might be difficult to discuss. You might not know a lot about it, and being able to ask those hard questions. We found that earmarking physical space to incorporate Indigenous presence within an organization is a beautiful way to kind of start that conversation. Sometimes that means having a land acknowledgement, if that's meaningful for your work and your organization and it's done in a proper and respectful way, that can be really significant. Sometimes that means inviting Indigenous communities into the conversation or into the event. Sometimes that means taking a step outside of your comfort zone and learning more or engaging with Indigenous partners that you may not have considered before. So I really think that it really starts with being willing and open to taking that next step to engage and to learn more, to ensure that it's a meaningful and reciprocal relationship and interaction when engaging.
Absolutely. A lot of great suggestions in there. I think I'm going to watch that back so I can know exactly what can be done. And yeah, I wanted to also highlight, like you said, learn more, educate yourself. That's no matter who you are, if you're new to the country, if you've been here, you can always find out more. And I think that's a good first step for sure, among everything else you mentioned. So what connection do you see between reconciliation and creating resilient communities and or in addressing mental health?
I think acknowledging the hard truths and acknowledging the continued impacts of the past is a crucial first step in being able to address healing and mental health. I mean, I think about where we were even just 5 years ago, where, you know, reconciliation or holding space for Indigenous perspectives or voices wasn't even, you know, a blip on the conscious mainstream. We've come a long way in furthering this conversation, but there's so much further to go. And I mean, we're so focused on ensuring that the next generation of young Canadians understands the true history of what happened in this country. You can't address the intergenerational trauma and the effects of residential schools without even understanding that they existed in the first place and understanding the continued impact of residential schools and how that, you know, has constructed systems like child welfare and justice and the over-representation of Indigenous peoples in those systems.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I think about a lot on my own is because like you mentioned, there's so much progress being made, but we're still nowhere where we need to get. So it's recognizing, you know, to be grateful that we are making progress, but to not get complacent in that and kind of like ride that wave into getting where we need to go. Because like you mentioned, there's still a long way to go for sure. Mm-hmm. It's clear that mental health and well-being are multifaceted topics that need to be approached from a holistic perspective. So we, of course, can't change the past, but I was hoping you could share your thoughts on the importance of addressing our history as a country as it pertains to the well-being of Indigenous communities.
For sure. I think, you know, one of the things that we should always be conscious of is using our history and the hard parts of what's occurred in the past to influence and change our actions for the better in the present and in the future. So how can we ensure that we're not repeating mistakes of the past? And how can we ensure that, you know, future systems that are being put in place aren't oppressive and are coming from a strength-based approach led by Indigenous communities and leaders and members being able to advocate and receive what they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I can't, you know, stress that enough. And it's something I've learned from doing this work for the past year. It's one thing. I mean, it's not even one thing to just throw money at a problem. You have to understand what's going on at the root. And that's why it's so important that all the initiatives are Indigenous led, Indigenous focused, and yeah, just that centered around Indigenous needs, but coming from them themselves, because only they know exactly what they need to further themselves.
And so every community is different. We have to be super mindful of the term. I have fear when we use the term Indigenous that it creates like a pan-Indigenous approach to a problem, and really it needs to be regionally based and it needs to be community based.
Absolutely. Even in Quebec up north, there's so many little communities, and the difference, no two are the same. So the difference between any one is just that vast. And yeah, so it's important to remember that. What kind of changes would you like to see at the governmental or community level in order to improve cross-cultural understanding?
Well, ideally, I'd like every kiddo in school to learn about Canada's true history, and in my dream world, holding proper space for Indigenous history, not just the impacts of colonization, but a strengths-based acknowledgement of Indigenous ways of knowing should really be incorporated into both our education system and governance systems. I think this would create deeper appreciation and understanding and value and appreciation for Indigenous worldviews and cultures. And I think the more Indigenous voices and the more Indigenous representation that we have both within government and educational bodies that can help influence this will continue to improve that cross-cultural understanding.
Yeah, for sure. I love that answer because I think, in doing this work, you just see the big black mark that residential school systems and colonization has left on, and it almost seems like that's all we can think about and talk about and remember. But like you said, it's a strength-based approach, remembering the Indigenous culture before and taking from that and bringing that into the fore is just such an important way that we will kind of move forward together while retaining the important aspects of culture that are needed. For them to thrive. So I wanted to ask you, are there ways for youth or community members to get involved with the Downie Wenjack Fund?
Absolutely. So educators can sign up to our free Legacy Schools program. Everyone can follow us on social media. I'd encourage youth to get involved in Secret Path Week. You can host your own Walk for Wenjack, host a viewing party. There's a whole number of activities to engage in. Secret Path Week is October 17th till the 22nd, and we have a whole bunch of digital events where youth and community members can learn more about the work that we do at the Downie Wenjack Fund, and also engage and help to lead their own reconciliations in their communities. So I would, sign up to our newsletter, sign up to our social feeds, and engage. We have a whole bunch of ways that folks can engage and contribute and volunteer. So get connected and stay connected.
That's right. Get connected. Absolutely. So check out all the websites that you mentioned, because I know that, like I said, the Downie Wenjack is doing such great work, and it can only increase with the support of the community, and as it should. I think I really like that word reconciliation. I've learned that from this interview. I'm gonna have to keep that one. So I guess take reconciliation, be part of the reconciliation, and just get involved. Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Before we go, I'd like to give you the final word. Are there any take homes you might want to share with anyone listening?
Well, this is an easy one because it's kind of like our de facto slogan, if charities have a slogan, I guess. But it's in the words of Gord Downie when he called us all to do something. And it seems so simple, just do something. But really, it can be as simple as taking that first step, whether it's visiting our website, whether it's watching The Secret Path, whether it's Googling whose land you're on, whether it's learning how to do a land acknowledgement, learning how to smudge. There's really no wrong first step. The important part is, getting to a place where you're willing and intentional about taking that first step. And there's a role for all Canadians on this journey towards reconciliation, and we all have a responsibility to get involved. And all I can say is reach out, get connected to the work we do, and don't be afraid. There's, reconciliation can seem like what do they call them? The big, hairy, sort of overarching themes of, how do you really pin it down? What is my role? What can I do? It's do something, really just engaging in the movement and learning more, and we'll get there.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Do something, get involved, and the rest will become clear after that. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Again, we're so grateful for the work that you do, the time you've shared with us today, and I hope that our paths cross again somewhere down the line.
Marcy, Miigwech, thank you so much for having me, and I hope to see you all on our socials.
Absolutely. Take care, Sarah. And to everyone listening, remember, do something. Get involved. Thank you.